Hello, Division 4. All right, so the First Peoples, this is page 17, and it's our first page into our social studies unit. And of course, we're talking about the three types of people, or the three founding peoples of Canada. And we've established that as we've got the Aboriginal people, or the First Peoples, and then you've got the French, and then you've got the English. So we're going to start with the First Peoples. And the First Nations in Inuit have been living in North America for as long as anyone can remember. Because you got to remember too that they didn't. When we say history, history is usually to do with written history, things that we can write down. Well, as we found out with a lot of earlier settling people and Aboriginal people, they didn't necessarily have a language that they actually wrote. They maybe scribed on rocks and things like that, but to actually have history books and things. So this is when they say as long as anyone can remember. They're the original inhabitants of the territory we call Canada. Okay, inhabitants, of course, means people who live somewhere. Can you imagine what it was like to be the first people? This was long before the time of modern technology. Isn't that kind of ironic? We say technology, and here we are. There were no cities, no highways or automobiles, and no factories or mines. That's a good point. So it was probably a pretty clean place to live if you think about it. Thundering herds of buffalo, got cut off there, but it is buffalo, still stamped across the plains. The plains are another word for flatlands. The lakes were filled with fish, and the forest was filled with wild animals. Huh, that's a pretty good situation, wouldn't you think? The lakes were filled with fish, the forest was filled with wild animals. Lots of things were still available because it wasn't overfished, it wasn't mined, it didn't forestry. We didn't take as we find, they take only what they need, and then it replenished itself. The people made their living from the land, which means through farming, through the animals, those type of things, the natural things. They built their houses out of wood from the trees and from the skins of animals. So this is going back to using everything that they took and not wasting anything. And of course, makes sense. They made their houses out of wood and trees from and the skins of the animals for clothing. They made clothing from woven bark and from furs and tanned and animal hides. They obtained food by hunting for deer, buffalo, and other animals, and by fishing in the lakes and rivers, and by gathering wild plants. Well, there's a lot of good stuff there. So that was kind of neat. They also used bark. They obtained food by hunting deer and buffalo, and of course, they fished in the lakes and rivers. And they also gathered wild plants. Those people who went to Fort Langley would remember they talked a lot about this, and I think they actually, with the one lady, Joyce, I can't remember her name now. Those people went. She had a hat that was made out of cedar bark. All right, so in the Arctic, of course, lot less trees, and the water is all frozen. The Copper Inuit hunted seals. On the Pacific coast, the Nuu-chah-nulth, here we go, Nuu-chah-nulth harpooned whales. In eastern Canada, here we go, Haudenosaunee raised crops of corn. Each part of the country provided its own way of making. That's what the important thing. You will never be asked how to pronounce those or spell those, so not to worry. But what you do need, the takeaway here is each part of the country provided its own way of living, which basically means if you live in the Arctic, you take what the Arctic can give you. You live in the West Coast where we live. Imagine this place, hundreds of years ago, there was so much of everything, and you made it. We're obviously not going to fish for or hunt for seals down here, as opposed to up in the Arctic, where they're not going to probably have as many cedar trees as we do down here. Now, here's a bit of a trivia that I'm going to say that again. Haudenosaunee were called the Iroquois, and you might have heard that one before. Going down to our picture here. Aboriginal peoples lived on the plains, hunted the buffalo on horseback. So no pollution there, well, at least the kind we know. They also drove them off of cliffs or chased them into pens. And that's an old story on how they would corner a buffalo on a hillside or a ledge and most times animals are as afraid of us as we think we are them, and they would run from us, and sometimes hurtle off they would run off a cliff, and you would imagine what would happen. The meat was used for food, and the skins and bones were made for tools and making utensils. All right, so there you go. Until next time.